Rhinar Club. You wouldn't necessarily think it in Commoner, but the value on this thing is actually pretty crazy in certain situations in Commoner. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my flesh and blood friends. Welcome back to Dice Commando and another installment of Dice Commando here on the channel, going over our Commoner format stuffs. Today, specifically talking my Rhinar Club build. Now, last week I talked about the results of the last Commoner crawl we had here in Portland, Oregon, and went over the top 4 decks of that, one of which was the winning deck, my deck, the Rhinar deck. Now, I've made some, obviously that was my first time piloting it, so I've made some changes and I want to talk about that and go through the deck today. Now the link's below, you can click that and go away, but I think there's some value to listening if you choose to do so. So if you've been following kind of the saga of this deck, it was about a month ago at this point, I was talking about, what looks good in Commoner, and one of the decks I'd identified was Rhinar Club, and I was like, I think this looks really good. I think I'm going to take it next week to Commoner Crawl. And then I did, and it won. Now that was with a caveat of everyone was playing around and exploring new stuff. We had no Iras, we had no Icelanders, and we had no Bravos, right? So huge caveat. That said, I was still very impressed with the value of this deck, but it didn't quite work the way that I had mathed out which makes sense considering I have virtually no experience with Brute, right? I mean, it makes sense once I get on the table. I was like, oh, okay, there's a couple things I need to do different. So looking at the deck list from last week is not going to get you here today. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up the deck. We're not necessarily just going to run. We're going to run through the deck, but I want to talk about a few things first, in specifically. Okay, so the loadout is 4 armor. It's usually you'd be like, oh, 4 armor is pretty good in the olden days, but now you've got heroes sitting down with a whole bunch more than that, even in Commoner. The creep is real in that format, but that's not a bad thing, right? We got to get the kids interested. Okay. Now we're straight up on Romping Club. There's no other play here. This is not a clause build or anything like that. Okay. The value on this thing is actually pretty crazy if you think about it. Okay. So for 2, it's a 2 for 4. But when you've discarded a 6 or more, so when you effectively intimidated, this gets +1. Okay, so what you really need to do is then pair the value of the discarded card with Rhinar with also giving you +1. Okay, now in the case of the claws and stuff, it gives you go again. There's value in that for sure. But in this case, it gives you effectively a might token. A courage token, I guess, would be more accurate in this case, right? Yeah, actually, that's true, right? So it basically treated as if Rhinar was saying intimidate and create a courage token. And that's not entirely true because it's only when you swing the club, but you get the point, okay? That's pretty good value, right? So you're taking a random card away in which they may need, right? They may need that card. And at the very least, it makes them suboptimally block, assumedly, that they have to, okay? So that's why we're building around that. Now, there's a couple stand-ins for the club, specifically Predatory Assault. So if you've discarded a card with 6 or more, it gains Dominate. That's pretty good, right? So it's, in that case, it doesn't make the Intimidate super valuable because you're already getting effectively a triple Intimidate, but it does shut off a card from, it only affects hand, right? Dominate. So if they have a D-React, then fair enough. But I think you're willing to trade that for effectively a 2x Intimidate. I guess a 3x Intimidate in that case. So that's pretty good, right? I think that value's there pretty well. Okay. And now the other thing in this deck that does well on it is, where is it? Pack Hunt. Sorry, there we go. So Pack Hunt also intimidates. So you can start to see, you can string together some pretty gross things with the all-star of the deck, which is Bonebreaker Bellow. So Bonebreaker Bellow, again, no secret that I am a huge fan of this card. You can target discard, which is pretty huge because if you look at this deck overall, the number of 6s is there's not a lot of 6s in here in the grand scheme of things, right? Compared to what you might normally think you need to do. with like Wild Rides and Pulpings and stuff like that. Okay, because we're counting on targeted discards or setup discards. So you can do the Bonebreaker Bellow with a blue, a Bonebreaker Bellow, and a Chuck card. Okay, you also then have to a similar effect, I should say, you have Madcap Charger, which lets you then do it over 2 attacks. Now, do keep in mind, Madcap requires a 6 or more to get the go again. Right now, the idea obviously of Bonebreaker is that you can target a discard and then arsenal something. So Madcap Charger is good that it's across 2 attacks and it makes breakpoints weird. That's a good thing. But Bonebreaker Bellow lets you just come in for a boatload of damage and target a discard, and if you're in the right situation, still keep a card. Whereas in other cases, especially with the number of 6s we have, you're not necessarily in that right spot. Okay. So now going into one more thing I want to talk about, lead with power. The value of this off club is absolutely insane, right? And sure, you could do it into one of the other 2s or something like that. Completely valid. But the fact that you can do lead with power and a blue, right, a 2-card hand into club for 7, within 1 on the backside for next turn, is also pretty value crazy. Okay, and then let's go over to Pummel. Pummel always has huge value, especially in Commoner. The problem with it in this deck is the 2s, so the math there, right, in terms of having the resources. But one little trick you can do, remember that Barkbone Strapping is an instant, so you can kind of try and set yourself up, and then, if it doesn't work, you tuck it, and then they're worried, right? They're worried what's in the arsenal. And, having a card in, when they know you're playing Pummel and having a card in arsenal and having another card in hand, they're always worried. They always have to be worried, right, about Pummel. Okay, so going through the deck itself, we have Assault Battery. That's red, yellow. Okay, so that's a 3/7, 3/6. I didn't find, the agility token, fine. Realistically, I'm not beating chest on this, right? Like, what are you really using your agility token for here, unless it's probably like a win more type situation, right? Because you've got 3s, you've got 2s. By and large, it's a good turn, but like, what are you taking to get that good turn? So I'm not saying, in Magical Dreamland that it wouldn't work, but like, by and large, you're not going to really use that, right? Bonebreaker Bellow, plus 5/4/3 with an Intimidate, plus it turns on club, good. Okay, lead with power, good. Madcap Charger, good. Pack Hunt is just raw awesomeness. Okay, 2/6, we've even got the 2/4, 2/4 to close out games. Just Predatory Assault red for the 6. Pummel, red, blue. Now, one of the things I was toying around with was playing just one Pummel. You'll notice from the previous version of this deck, if you're tracking, that I actually took out Blue Smash Instinct for the Pummels. Because remember, Blue Smash Instinct is 5, so it doesn't help you there. But you do lose the 1 defense, but I was thinking about just running 1 of each. I ended up landing on 2 Pummels just because it can do things. Do keep in mind, right? Remember, it's very important to remember that you don't discard off the club, but it's there for you on the club, right? So again, it's kind of bad math, but you can, it can take you over the top if you're there, right? Savage Swing. This one is kind of rough. 1 for 7 with another discard. It kind of gets you out of weird situations with all red hands. This might be something that you try and set up, like, you could, in theory, like, Assault and Battery and targeted. So, like, say you get an Assault and Battery and a blue and a Savage Swing in your hand. You could potentially try and set it up for a go again. And then you could Savage Swing, right, go again into your club. It could happen, right? And then that would actually be easy to do if you could do it. I don't think that's super realistic because it requires a lot of things to really line up, but that is why this one's in here, is for the like edge case possibility. And again, it's another 7 that you can discard. Smash Instinct is just a flat good card to play on its own. Just Smash Instinct in a blue. You don't need to chuck. It intimidates. Kind of does what you need to do in a pinch out of a 2-card hand. That's pretty good value. Smash with Big Tree is just flat out good. This is the only card in here that doesn't defend, as opposed to a lot of the other ones. But it's just really good. Like 2 for 7 is just straight good. Wrecker Romp, yellow, blue, no eggs being cracked there. And then Madcap Muscle. The reason I have this in here is, again, if you can set it up, that's a blue 3 for 7 with a 3-card hand. So It's not super, but it's there. Okay, going into the inventory, we've got Oasis. We have Sink Below. This was, that you do need it. You do need it for certain matchups. Then to run an AB3 that didn't come up again in my thing. Do keep in mind, I actually switched up from the previous deck. I actually switched up. I was running the Robe before, and I realized that's kind of dumb because Sparkbone Strapping can make you, assuming you don't have Frostbites, it can make you money for when you need it, potentially. So that's there. So I ended up skewing away. I was keeping, I think, the head before, and now I'm keeping the strapping, which I think is, again, after playing it, I think that's the right play. Some feedback I've taken on this in terms of like why not Iron Rot Gauntlet, or not Iron Rot, sorry, Goliath Gauntlet for the +2, completely valid. You can definitely do that and go more aggressive if you want to set up with like, it could totally work, right? You get that turn where you Bonebreaker into, Predatory or Pack Hunt can absolutely happen. You can pop it, even go harder. Completely valid. I just liked the one block because I was mainly focusing on club. But it's definitely worth playing around with if you want to try and go a little harder. Okay, so that's the list and the theory there. Now, again, some really cool plays. I mean, the cool plays pretty much speak for themselves. That's part of the reason I like this, is it's just like low-level consistency. It's not very hard to play. The value is really good there, so it just kind of becomes a math game. And then as long as you basically don't strike out with sixes and or blues, you're not up a creek, right? And you can still always just swing club and arsenal something and then set yourself up bigger. So again, that's why I like the 2-4 versus the claw or something like that, right? Because to 2-4 versus a 2-3, it just seems better to me. So anyway, that's the take. That's the list. Have fun with it. I think this deck's very good. I'd put it in tier 1.5. I don't think it can go like. I think this one does very well, and Decimator Olympia is very popular right now. I think this will do very well into that because it takes away potentially the cards they want to block with, and then it puts them in a weird situation. So I think it can raise Decimator Olympia. You don't necessarily super want to block with this as it is, so then every card you hold on to generally turns into more food for Rhinar. Not a bad deal, right? So I think it does pretty well into that. I don't think it does super great into Icelander, just being realistic. Bravo, I don't think it does super well into Bravo. And then if it can intimidate the right cards from Ira, maybe, put them in a situation where you get their D-reacts out of their hand, and then they have to either give you their twos or they have to give you their blue zeros, right? And by the twos, I mean their 2-cost ones that they want to come in big with. So I think that might go well for you, but I think you're counting on good intimidate. So, but again, when you're presenting a lot of value consistently, I think it does okay. So anyway, I'll wrap it up. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in for more Commando stuff. Make sure to give the comments below if you're into it. If nothing else, go Commando.